They thought the colony would fall in silence. They thought no one would come. The Vorthons were right about one thing. Kepler's Rest had no fleet left, no weapons strong enough to break the siege. But what they didn't know was that their distress call had reached the wrong species, humans. And history had already proven one truth. When humans answer a cry for help, it's not rescue. It's retribution. Before we begin, if you're new here, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's begin. The transmission should never have made it past the blockade. Kepler's Rest was cut off, surrounded, and doomed. Yet somehow a flicker of signal tore through the static and screamed into the void. It wasn't even much of a message. Just fragments. A child crying, a broken plea for mercy, a flare of coordinates broadcast across every band of light, and far away in the dark between stars, it landed in human space. No one else would have listened. The elder races had long since sealed the borders, declaring Kepler's Rest a lost cause. But humanity? Humanity had never been invited to their grand council, never been trusted with their rules, never been shackled by their treaties. So when that cry reached human ears, it was not weighed, debated, or buried under diplomacy. It was answered. The first ships that arrived weren't warships. They didn't look like much at all. Patched freighters, converted mining rigs, vessels painted with the scars of old battles. But inside them burned something the Vorthons had never learned to measure. Resolve. The kind that does not negotiate. The kind that does not leave a cry unanswered. The Vorthons expected surrender. That was their mistake. For 1,000 years, their empire had grown fat on easy victories. They had strangled colonies, burned out resistance, and broken civilizations that begged them for mercy. They expected Kepler's Rest to break the same way, but instead of silence, they found something else waiting in the void. The first human ships didn't fire. They simply arrived, settling into orbit like wolves circling prey. Their hulls glowed faintly with jury-rigged shields, and weapon pods bolted on like scars. To the Vorthons, they looked crude, desperate, but that was only on the surface. Because inside those ships, the humans weren't engineers, or diplomats, or colonists. They were survivors, and survivors don't fight clean. The Vorthons hailed them with threats and ultimatums. They demanded immediate withdrawal. The humans didn't even respond. They didn't speak their language. They didn't need to. Instead, the freighters opened their bays and released something into the black. At first, the Vorthons thought it was debris, harmless junk. Then the debris began to move. Drones, jury-rigged from mining rigs and scavenged tech, swarmed through the blockade like wasps loosed from a hive. They didn't attack the warships directly. No. Humans never started with the obvious. Instead, the drones targeted sensors, comm relays, engines, little bites, tearing at the nerves of the blockade until the fleet twitched in confusion. The Vorthons had crushed empires with star forges and plasma sieges. They had never fought an enemy who thought like this, who turned desperation into strategy, who didn't fight for territory, but for one burning principle. If you corner humanity, they come out swinging. The first Vorthon ship died not in glorious battle, but in chaos. Its engines shredded, its reactor bleeding into vacuum, abandoned by its own fleet as they scrambled to regroup. The humans didn't cheer. They didn't gloat. They simply moved closer, like predators closing in. And suddenly, the Vorthons realized the truth too late. They weren't fighting rebels. They weren't fighting colonists. They were fighting the one species that had made survival itself into an art form. And survival had teeth. The Vorthons thought they understood war. They didn't understand terror. When the first ship went dark, they told themselves it was bad luck. When the second vanished, its distress signal a scream cut short. They said it was sabotage. But when the third exploded from the inside out, its crew found suffocated by their own life support, the lie collapsed. These weren't accidents. This was design. And the design had a signature. The humans weren't trying to win through brute strength. They didn't have it. They weren't trying to match fleets for fleets, ship for ship. They didn't have that either. What they had was something much simpler and far more dangerous. They had studied what the Vorthons feared, and they turned it into a weapon. The drones didn't just disable engines. They screamed on every frequency, mimicking the sounds of Vorthon predators, the howls of beasts from their homeworld's frozen wilds. Boarding pods didn't just cut into hulls. They released chemical clouds that triggered hallucinations, making Vorthon soldiers relive their worst nightmares while humans swept in with knives and fire. This wasn't war. It was theater. A theater where terror was the script and humanity played the lead role. On the second week of the blockade, Vorthon captains began faking engine malfunctions just to leave the front line. Veterans who had never once faltered now twitched at shadows, jerking at phantom noises in the dark. Commanders filed reports that made no sense, whispers in the airlock, human eyes in places no human could fit, drones that vanished before impact. One admiral ordered his ships to fire blindly into the void. They expended half their fuel reserves, hitting nothing. He was relieved of duty the next morning, but the damage was already done. Fear spread faster than truth. That was when humanity understood. We didn't need fleets. We didn't need resources. We didn't even need victory. We only needed their fear. And once we had that, we could trade it. Because when the first alien envoy came crawling, offering concessions just to stop the nightmare, humanity realized something no empire had ever dared admit aloud. Fear was a currency, and we had the monopoly. The Vorthon envoy arrived shaking. His scales twitched, his speech cracked, his translator almost broke from the tremors in his voice. He wasn't there to threaten, he was there to beg. "Stop the nightmares," he pleaded, sliding data chips across the table, glowing with planetary coordinates and mineral rights. "Take territory, take resources, just stop." And that was when humanity discovered something staggering. The war didn't have to be fought anymore. It could be sold. At first, we thought it was just desperation, a cornered empire flinging bribes to save face. But then word spread. Other species, watching from the sidelines, realized the truth. If humans were terrifying the Vorthons into collapse, who would be next? So they paid. Not in coin, not in trade routes. They paid in planets. Whole worlds handed over in quiet treaties, signed in rooms where the lights flickered low and human negotiators never smiled. We didn't conquer. We didn't expand by force. We rented terror, one nightmare at a time. But here's the twist. It wasn't just fear of us. It was fear through us. Some species wanted their rivals humbled. Others wanted internal dissidents silenced. Entire governments came forward with contracts. Point your fear machines there, not here. They didn't hire assassins. They didn't hire fleets. They hired humans to do what only humans could, weaponize the unseen. And so our reputation spread across the stars, not as builders, not as traders, not even as warriors. We became something else entirely, a service, a profession, a shadow economy of terror. The galaxy whispered our new title in languages too many to count. We weren't an empire. We weren't even a nation anymore. We were the fear brokers, and every contract signed bought us what no battlefield ever could: survival. But there was a problem. The deeper we sank into this new role, the harder it became to tell who was the hunter and who was the prey. For months, it worked. Planets stacked up like poker chips. Resources flowed in rivers. The galaxy treated us not as refugees, not as survivors, but as something far more dangerous, curators of fear itself. But then came the Zelth Dominion. They didn't beg. They didn't pay. They laughed. When human envoys arrived, offering their unspoken ultimatum, peace through fear, safety through nightmares, the Dominion broadcast their response across 100 systems. "These apes sell shadows," their emperor sneered. "We do not bow to shadows." The message rippled across the galaxy. For every species that had knelt, For every council that had signed away worlds, the Dominion's defiance was a spark on dry kindling. If they could resist, why couldn't others? We couldn't let that stand. And so, for the first time, humanity didn't wait for a contract. We chose the target ourselves. The Dominion's fleets were enormous, their armies countless, their arrogance absolute. They thought nightmares were nothing but whispers. They forgot one thing: whispers echo. It began small. Their admirals woke screaming, clawing at invisible insects. Their soldiers deserted in droves, convinced they'd seen shadows where no light should fall. In the streets of their capital, panic riots broke out, sparked by nothing more than sudden silences in the night. The Dominion claimed it was propaganda, psychological tricks, illusions, but their people weren't convinced. And then came the turning point. A live broadcast of the Emperor himself, speaking of strength and defiance, when mid-sentence, he froze. His eyes widened. He stammered. His voice cracked as he pointed at something behind the cameras. The feed cut. The galaxy didn't need to see what he saw. It was enough that he saw something. The Dominion never recovered. Contracts poured in, species offering us entire sectors if we would only do to them what you did to the Zelth. Our power doubled overnight. But behind the celebration, a question gnawed at us. What had the Emperor really seen? Because we hadn't sent anything. At first, nobody wanted to admit it. Not the Council of 12, the human warlords who now managed the contracts. Not the handlers, not the brokers, not the nightmare architects. But the fact was simple. The Emperor of the Zelth Dominion had seen something we hadn't given him. That should have been impossible. Our nightmares were designed, crafted, engineered by human hands. They came from us. We owned them, we controlled them, we sold them like commodities. But this was raw, uncut, unlicensed fear. Reports began trickling in. A mining colony swore its tunnels whispered even when abandoned. A transport crew woke to find every viewport showing different stars. A diplomat from the Ordax Confederacy clawed her own eyes out after screaming, "It's looking through me!" We didn't send any of those contracts. And yet, the panic worked in our favor. Terrified nations flooded us with more offers, desperate to protect themselves from whatever was loose. The irony was bitter. They assumed we controlled it. They thought it was still ours. But our best minds, the same ones who'd weaponized nightmares, knew better. Somewhere along the way, fear had stopped being just a weapon. It had become a seed, and it was growing. I was there the night we confirmed it. In a bunker deep beneath the trading hub of Carthus Prime, our analysts played the Emperor's final broadcast on loop, frame by frame, second by second. When the freeze hit, when his eyes locked on the unseen horror, you could see the shadows bend around him, not like tricks of the light, not like illusions, like gravity itself leaning in to listen. We'd thought fear was currency, but maybe it was fuel, and something out there had been starving. The chamber smelled like iron and ash. 12 seats encircled a black stone table, each occupied by one of humanity's warlords turned merchants, the so-called Council of 12. Once, they'd led armies. Now they brokered contracts in terror like bankers trading currency. And as I sat in the shadows behind them, watching their faces flicker in the dim glow of holograms, I realized something terrifying. For the first time since the war ended, they were afraid. The feed from Carthus Prime replayed again. The Zelth Emperor frozen in his throne, eyes wide, the air around him bending like it was being pulled into another dimension. The clip ended, silence pressing heavy. "Explain it," one of the council demanded, but no one could. We had mapped every nightmare. We had tailored them like scalpel strikes, whispers that eroded morale, hallucinations that drove soldiers to panic, phantoms that dissolved discipline. But this thing? It didn't fit our blueprints, and worse, reports kept spreading. Entire fleets refusing to fly. colonies begging for sanctuary, aliens muttering in council halls that maybe the humans had lied. The 12 turned on each other. Some argued we double down, sell more fear, prove control by sheer scale. Others hissed that if the galaxy realized this wasn't ours, we'd lose the one weapon keeping us alive. That's when the chairwoman, Old Admiral Vera herself, slammed a steel fist on the table. Her voice was gravel and venom. "We are the nightmare brokers. If the galaxy believes something has slipped our leash, they'll stop fearing us. And when that happens..." She leaned forward, eye burning. "We are prey again." Her solution was brutal. We wouldn't just keep selling fear. We'd escalate. We would design nightmares so vast, so consuming, that no alien mind could survive doubting our power. We would bury this anomaly beneath waves of manufactured terror until the galaxy begged for our leash again. The others nodded, reluctant, but cornered. And in that moment, I realized the Council of 12 hadn't seen the truth yet. They thought they were still in control, but what haunted the Zelth Emperor wasn't our creation. It was watching us. And I suspected it wasn't impressed. The first sign wasn't a battle report. It wasn't a defector. It wasn't even the collapse of a trade lane. It was a knock. Not on a door of steel or stone, but on the very fabric of our world. Earth's skies split without thunder. A seam, faint as a scar, opened over the Atlantic. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't even matter. It was absence, pressed into a shape. Satellites died when they looked at it too long. Pilots swore they heard voices bleeding into their helmets, whispers of drowned cities and dead children who never lived. And then came the fear. Not alien fear, not the fear we'd designed in labs and packaged like commodities. This was raw, unfiltered, older than language. The kind of terror that didn't just make your hands shake. It rewrote you, hollowed you out from the inside until even your heartbeat felt borrowed. I watched cities choke on silence. No riots, no screaming, just millions of people frozen, staring upward, unable to blink. The council tried to spin it at first. They broadcast messages claiming it was our demonstration. Another grand human trick. Another reason to pay in planets and privileges. But the aliens weren't calling to bargain anymore. They were calling to beg, not for mercy, for answers. "What have you done?" the Athari Chancellor demanded on an open channel. Her voice cracked, and she was one of the coldest creatures I'd ever known. "It's not bound. It doesn't answer to you. It doesn't answer to anyone." And in that instant, every deal we'd made, every shadow empire of fear we'd built began to collapse. Because they were right. This wasn't ours. We'd been selling the galaxy its own nightmares for years. But now, something had come knocking. Something that smelled the blood in the water. And the worst part? It wasn't asking. It was entering. The knock had turned into a door. And I feared that, for the first time, humanity had underestimated the very currency we thought we controlled. The door didn't open with sound. It opened with absence. Like the world took a breath inward and never let it out again. Every sensor went blind, every frequency went white, even light bent wrong as if ashamed to be seen near it, and yet we all knew it was there. The aliens screamed across comms, entire fleets abandoned posts, not because of weapons but because their crews clawed at their own suits, trying to tear themselves out of existence rather than remain in its shadow. But humanity, we didn't move. Not because we were braver, but because for the first time in history the galaxy looked at us for an answer, and it spoke. Not with words, with memories. A soldier in Cairo collapsed, shrieking about a war he'd never fought. A mother in Kansas saw her child's face rot away before her eyes, though the boy stood alive beside her. An admiral on Luna ripped out her own eyes, screaming that something was watching through them. Nightmares, not crafted, not sold, returned. And then, finally, a voice, if you could call it that. It didn't come from the sky or the seas or the comms. It came from inside. Every throat, every mind, every trembling bone. You trade what is ours. The words weren't accusation. They weren't rage. They were hunger. For centuries, humanity had thought itself clever. We'd weaponized fear, packaged it like grain, sold it to desperate empires that couldn't even look at their own shadows without screaming. We'd made fear into currency. But this thing, this collector, as the Athari named it between sobs, did not bargain. It claimed ownership. Nightmare is not your harvest. It is us, and payment is due. That single sentence shattered the council. Civilizations that had once mocked us fell silent, begging us, humans, to fix what we'd unleashed. And for the first time since the war, I felt the galaxy finally understood what it meant to be us. Because humanity has always lived beside fear. We don't run from it. We dance with it. We drag it into stories, into firelit caves, into haunted houses and battlefields, and we name it ours. And as the collector pressed deeper into our skies, I realized the only thing left was the question no one dared ask. Could we sell a nightmare back to its source? The collector pressed into orbit, and every system screamed. Power grids failed not from overload, but because engineers refused to touch controls, too afraid that machines were whispering back. Hospitals overflowed, not with wounds, but with minds broken by things they'd never seen. The aliens begged, whole fleets of them, voices cracking over comms, pleading with humanity, the only species that didn't immediately collapse. Because fear had never been foreign to us. It was our oldest language, and that gave us a chance. On the third day of its presence, a summit convened on Sol's scarred moon. Not leaders, not admirals, not even politicians. Instead, they brought storytellers, horror directors, soldiers with war trauma, and children who could sleep after hearing ghost stories. We weren't going to fight it with weapons. We were going to fight it with imagination. Fear is a trade, the old general said. We made it currency. We exported it. Now it's time to sell one last product, the one thing no nightmare can own. A plan formed, insane but necessary. If nightmares fed the collector, then the only way to starve it was to give it something it couldn't digest. Hope, wrapped in terror. We began weaving stories, terrible, unholy visions of war, of collapse, of extinction. But each one threaded with a single unbearable twist. Humanity surviving, humanity enduring, humanity smiling back. When the broadcasts went live, the collector didn't lash out. It listened. We told it of firestorms and mushroom clouds, yet our species rebuilding from ash. We told it of endless plagues and drowned cities, yet humans walking barefoot into new mornings. We told it of every horror carved into our bones and the fact that we were still here. And for the first time, the collector faltered. Its shadow stuttered. Its voice cracked like glass. Because we weren't just selling nightmares anymore. We were selling resistance, and resistance was poison to it. But that wasn't enough. It recoiled, yes, it staggered, yes, but it did not fall. And then came the whisper that changed everything. Not from an admiral, not from a leader. From a boy in Nairobi, no older than 12, speaking into a broken comm link. If it owns nightmares, then give it our worst one. Every head turned. Every survivor froze. He didn't mean stories. He meant the one nightmare humanity had carried since the dawn of time, the nightmare we'd buried under weapons and politics and stories, the nightmare we'd all pretended didn't breathe beneath our civilization. We were about to sell death itself back to the thing that thought it owned fear. The boy's words didn't fade. They echoed. Every survivor felt it, even if they didn't want to admit it. The collector fed on fear, but it had only ever consumed the easy kind, the screams of prey, the terror of sudden extinction, the surface-level panic of fragile species. But humanity's oldest nightmare wasn't about being hunted. It was about being hunted by ourselves. The council chamber went silent. No one breathed as the general finally spoke. You mean we show it us? Not war machines, not monsters, not plagues, but the deep, festering horror of what humans do to humans when cornered, starving, desperate, the nightmare of betrayal, of cruelty without end, of neighbors turning on neighbors when the fire burned low. It was the one terror no alien could comprehend, because their species never fractured the way ours did. And it was the one terror we had carried since the first sharpened stone struck bone. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a story. It was a scar older than civilization. The plan that took shape was madness. We would not hide our darkest self. We would broadcast it, amplify it, and burn it across the stars, feeding the collector not just fear, but the truth of humanity's capacity for horror. And hidden within that truth, the part no nightmare could survive. That somehow, impossibly, despite it all, we endured. So we showed it the trenches of Verdun, the camps of Auschwitz, the blackened cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the killing fields, the gulags, the famines we inflicted on ourselves. Every alien on the broadcast begged us to stop. They said no species should survive what we were showing. They screamed that even watching was unbearable. But the collector watched, and for the first time, it screamed. It had never imagined a species could birth its own nightmares, feed on them, learn from them, and keep walking forward. We were the only thing it couldn't own, because we had already owned ourselves. But the collector wasn't gone. Its shadow writhed, its presence cracked, but it didn't shatter. Not yet. Not because we had given it our nightmare. Now we needed to give it the ending. The collector writhed across the void like a wounded god, screaming in frequencies that cracked moons. It had tasted humanity's darkness, and it couldn't contain it. The more it fed, the more it choked. But it wasn't finished. Not yet. Its voice cut through the fleets, a thunder that bent ships until their hulls sang with strain. You are endless. You are broken. You are mine. For a moment, even humanity staggered. The nightmares we had unleashed threatened to turn inward. Memories clawed at survivors. Some saw their ancestors' chains. Others smelled the burning cities. Even our soldiers began to waver under the weight of our shared sins. The boy who had spoken before now stood, shaking but unbroken. His voice, thin but steady, carried through the silence. No, you don't understand. That wasn't the nightmare. That was the trial. The nightmare is what comes if we give up. The ending is that we don't. The general turned, his scarred face twisted into something between fury and hope. And then he gave the order, not to fire, not to flee, but to speak. Every surviving ship broadcast the same message. Every human voice, soldier and civilian, child and elder, poured across the stars. Not just fear, not just terror, but the stubborn, defiant refusal to end. We showed the collector the aftermath, the rebuilding, the hands that rose after blood, the children born after fire. We showed it that humanity was not its fear, but its choice to carry fear and keep walking anyway, and that was the one thing it could not survive. Because nightmares demand surrender, and we would not give it. The collector howled as its form split, unraveling into shards of shadow. It tried to anchor itself in the minds of the other species, but they had seen too much. They had seen humanity survive its own abyss, and they could never fear the same way again. And then, silence. The kind that falls after a monster dies. Planets once enslaved to terror blinked free. Allies who had once feared us now turned, wide-eyed, as though seeing humanity for the first time. We had destroyed the thing that devoured civilizations, not with fire, not with fleets, but with the only export humanity ever truly had. Our terror, sharpened into a weapon, and the unbreakable choice to outlive it. The war was over. The collector was gone. And for the first time in living memory, the galaxy was afraid of nothing, except us.